Okay, good morning, everybody. We are here again. I'm Sebastiano from Nova Via, and this is another Nova Talk. Today, we have the great pleasure to be here with Karim Khan from the BJSM, Editor-in-Chief of the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So, first of all, Karim, thank you for accepting our invitation. How are you doing today?
I'm well, Sebastiano, thank you. Thinking of everyone in the world with the different challenges and difficult times, but happy to try to help in my role as the BJSM editor.
Yeah, thanks. Are you in Canada now, right?
Yeah, in Vancouver, in Canada, at home, staying 2 meters away from people.
Yeah, as we are all doing. So a brief introduction for who might not know who Karim is. So anyway, long story short, since 2008, he has been the editor-in-chief of the BJSM, British Journal for Sports Medicine, leading international scientific journal that focuses mainly on sport and exercise medicine. So consequently speaking, obviously with the interest of a lot of interest from sports physical therapists, musculoskeletal physical therapists, and sports medicine doctors and orthopedic doctors as well. And as widely known, also he is the co-author of the best-selling and worldwide renowned textbook Bruckner and Kahn's Clinical Sports Medicine. So this is a brief description of what we are doing, Karim. The Nova Talks in this, again, pandemic period, the idea of Nova Via was to create different kind of contents, not just strictly speaking clinically related to clinical topics, but also cross talks with experts from all over the world and to stimulate further thoughts possibly. So today we're going to talk a lot about a few things, and let's start with a question. So I will start from the process of running a leading scientific journal that lies in the Q1, quartile 1. For, again, who might not know, Q1 means the top 25 of the impact factor distribution, such as it is the BJSM. So Karim, why do we need journals, scientific journals, and how can they help the field?
Sebastiano, our community, and I'll target the physiotherapy community particularly when I'm speaking today. I think that's a great part of the Nova Via and Nova Talks focus. Wearing a clinical hat, and I used to be a clinician myself as a medical doctor in a multidisciplinary sports medicine clinic where we had physios and podiatrists and massage therapists and sports psychologists. I was very fortunate to work in a big setting like that. We're all looking for new treatments and best best investigations and diagnostic tests. So we learn the basics in our university education, of course, and things continually change. And we update that from what we hear from colleagues, from what we learn at conferences, and journals are one part of these platforms that help us with our ongoing education. And the argument is, well, it should just be a free, one argument is that it should just be a free for all and there should be information on the internet, but there needs to be a curating. There needs to be some sense of quality because no one can keep up to date with everything on the internet. And the idea is that the journal structure, and we'll talk about the multimedia element of journals later, but the journal structure, the concept is there will be a group of open-minded experts who would filter and then mean people who want to go, well, this has been approved by people like Chad Cook or Jill Cook, to stick with the Cooks, or the editors of their journals. They think these things are of a high quality, and that's a filtering system. So I think there needs to be some filtering, and that's, as the audience will understand, the purpose of this one type of peer review and promotion.
Okay. So you cover this role for longer than 12 years now, right? You started being editor-in-chief of the journal in 2008. Am I right? Is that correct?
You are right, as you mentioned. And while we're here, anyone who wants to be the next editor of BJSM, they've got a couple of weeks from the time of us recording this in April of 2020, because the new editor competition closes. The applicants for new editors of BJSM closes at the end of April 2020, and there'll be interviews in May of 2020 for a new editor starting January of 2021. And I'll have had 13 years in this role and with this responsibility, and I've been grateful for the opportunity. I've worked with a great team of editors, authors, peer reviewers. It's our whole community. It takes a village, is the saying, as you know, to move our field forward and ultimately to take better care of patients. And I've been very fortunate to be a player in that role.
Yeah, and in terms of elevating the quality and relevance of the published papers, you certainly played a big role because of the, how meaningful. I've been chatting with Chad Cook about this, and it was all about how strong your role was and has been in terms of, again, making sure that the published papers were meaningful, so they had an impact. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about this process? So the way you made it happen along the years, you've been in charge. So you had some phases, you mentioned me, and maybe you want to share them to the people that are listening.
Sure. And I'm conscious that community members, folks watching this video and listening, and appreciate the opportunity, are largely clinicians and not fascinated about what we might say the nitty gritty of editing a comma here or an apostrophe there. But in the context of the field, we wanted to make sure there was a really good home for sports physical therapists and orthopedic and manual physiotherapists, the physiotherapists who work in what I call the sport and exercise physical activity community. And there are journals in that field. One that obviously comes to mind by title is Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy, JOSPT. There are great papers for our field in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, particularly in relation to surgery. And there are broad journals in our field, and there's room for all the journals because they have a different focus. So if I share what we tried to do in BJSM, is we tried to be very clinically relevant, and it's because the owners of BJSM and the core community, the owners are doctors, the British Doctor Association and the BMJ medical group. So they each own half of the journal financially, which is not a secret. And so our editorial board and the community we listen to are those people who work in sport and promote physical activity. And I think that's a really important role for physiotherapists, promoting physical activity and your audience. So it's like, if we at BJSM want to serve the community, i.e. the Nova Talk, Nova Via audience, what can we do? And so that means papers that are relevant to clinical practice. So if I use an example of a very sophisticated biomechanics paper about foot strike and inverse pendulums and kinematics and kinetics, these things, that's not the focus of the day-to-day clinician who wants to know how mechanics might affect injury, but not the engineering and the physics, I would say, and the maths of the biomechanics. And so we suggested that those papers go to Biomechanics Journal. And so we had this really clear focus among the editors going, with three questions. Is it true? Obviously, when something comes in, we have to filter it and see if it's true. And then if that's the case, then is it new? Because that could be interesting. And then the key question is, will it change what clinicians do? And we stole these ideas from the BMJ, which the British Medical Journal historically, but now officially called the BMJ, which clearly has been going for hundreds of years and is an international leader. And that's the beauty of being in BJSM, is we're part of the BMJ family. And so they had this thing about, papers for the BMJ, is it new, is it true, will it change what doctors do in their case? And so we hope we've been faithful to that in the papers that we have filtered as editors. So I'll take a breath there and just make the point that some people think that peer review should decide whether papers get in or not, and we're going to get to peer review in a minute. But when you get 1,500 papers coming into a journal and there's room to publish, say, 150 to 200, the peer reviewers aren't magically going to choose 150 papers. The peer reviewers, by definition, are sent papers that they're interested in. So they tend to like the papers because it works in their area of interest. If you're a knee physiotherapist and you get sent a knee paper, you're going to say, well, the knee is interesting. And so the editors themselves have to filter what papers go out to peer review and make decisions up front. And in our journal, that's at around the 60 to 70% sort of case where we decide up front as a group of 4 editors. And this is where I need to mention, my fantastic co-editors. There are 4 of us that run the journal, And there's Babette Plom, who's a sports physician, fantastic tennis doctor from Netherlands, and vast experience and a PhD in cardiology and a professor in South Africa, as well as her home role in Netherlands. There's Professor Kay Crosley, who'll be very familiar with many in the audience, who's a professor of sports physiotherapy in La Trobe University in Melbourne, the La Trobe Sport and Exercise Medicine Group. And then we have Manos Stamatakis, Emmanuel Stamatakis, and he's a professor in the physical activity domain in Sydney, the University of Sydney in Australia. So I'm a Canadian, as the audience knows, although trained in Australia. And then we make these decisions up front. So then we rely on the peer reviewers to improve the quality of papers and to give us further insight. And that's a critical element. And the journal lives or dies by the peer reviewers. And I use this chance to say thank you to folks who have been peer reviewers, and that's critical. And when things go wrong, it's because we haven't had the quality of peer review that we'd like. And everyone's busy, and peer review is a voluntary thing, so it's a critical element and very, very dependent. And then at the top journals, they what's called fine-tune papers. Once they've been accepted, someone from the editor team goes through again with a fine-tooth comb to improve the readability of the papers. And I know they do that at JOSPT. Dr. Claire Arden fine-tunes. The top JAMA, BMJ, New England, they get fine-tuning. Some journals don't fine-tune, and I'd argue that it's a resource issue. They don't have the money, the resources, the time to spend on that, so they just take the author's final manuscript and just publish it. And so then you don't get the consistency and the quality of writing and the clarity that the journals that fine-tune do. And I mention that because the odd naive author who hasn't had a paper in a top journal can be surprised. It's only 1% where they go, how come you changed my writing? And the answer is because it needs to be clearer for the audience. And what the editor's job is to be the advocate for the reader and say, I don't understand this well. And that's the editor's final role. And I'm really clear of that when I do that. I'm advocating for the reader, going, the reader's busy. This doesn't make sense. You're making valid points, but you can improve how you're saying that. And so I need to push you and get you to do a better job.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the explanation. Now I would just move on to the peer-reviewed process then. So would you mind explain for who is watching how it actually works, why is needed? Well, why is needed? You already basically explained it, but how it works.
Yeah, sure. I think the easiest way is if we think of a young researcher in the audience, someone who's writing a paper, one of their first 0 to 5 papers, that the experienced readers can speed the video on through the YouTube mechanism to go faster and to get to the next bit. But if you're a young researcher, you choose a journal, and then there's this first process, and I'll make advice at the same time. So practically follow the journal instructions, because it's surprising how many people don't do that. But I guess I'm guilty of that when I try to build IKEA things at home. But same as with the IKEA thing, that doesn't work well if you don't follow the instructions. I really advocate to take the time to print out the instructions and read them carefully and follow them, so that you got the right category of paper. If it's an editorial and we're asking for 800 words and 8 references, don't send in twice as many of those, because it'll be frustrating when the journal rejects it at the office level. And we have Christina Jansen, who does a fantastic job in the office. So she screens the papers and makes sure they meet the criteria. And then it goes into a system, and every journal has a platform. We use a prominent and prevalent one called Scholar One. And so then the editors get every paper that comes in, and we then have a meeting where we decide which ones we're going to follow up with, and which ones we try to quickly get back to the author saying, look, this isn't a good fit for BJSM. So let's say it's about vibrating platforms and the role of vibrating platforms on muscle or bone. That's an interesting point, but for us, it's not clinically relevant enough. And so we would tell the author that doesn't work for us. And we try to do that inside a week, so the author can get on and submit to another journal. If it's in our area, like let's say ACL rehab, but we don't feel that it's fresh and it's not novel enough. It might be a story of 20 patients that you've rehabbed in your clinic. That's clearly relevant, but it's not new enough. So we would, again, respectfully suggest that goes to another journal. So that's part of the screening process that the 4 editors do in various combinations. And then if a paper gets through, so we have a new paper with a fantastic new treatment to stick with the ACL, and there's some new exercises, and they randomized people, and one group did much better. And so the implication is that people around the world should potentially adopt this research finding. Then we send that out to what's called an associate editor, and these are experts in their areas, such as people like Anne Cools on shoulder, and in concussion, we have people who are experts like John Patricius in South Africa and Mike McDesey in Australia. These people are all listed on the website. And so as editors, we try to guide to someone who's expert and interested. And then what they do is they have a second look to see whether the paper meets the BJSM criteria of excellence, and that they're more knowledgeable in these expert areas than we editors, obviously. And then if they agree, then they can they find reviewers. And before that, if they disagree, they can just get back to us and say, look, I really don't think this paper is going to make a big difference. And they might find a methods flaw because they're more expert in the methods. They might find that there was a hop test used in an ACL return to play, but it wasn't a valid hop test. And so then they'll tell us, look, we need to stop with this one because there's a flaw in the paper, and then we'd reject it at that point. So the whole point is for us to try to be quick with authors so that they're with BJSM for the minimum amount of time, either when they're going to be rejected or if it's going to be accepted. So then we get to the peer review where the associate editor, so now we're sending the third level, the editors, the associate editors, and then these peer reviewers, and will be experts in the field, and they will often look for different elements in the paper. We might choose someone who knows a lot about football if it's a football ACL paper, someone who knows a lot about ACL, obviously, and then sometimes, depending on the paper, someone with more methods experience and stats experience. And so if we think about systematic reviews, there's a very important issue on quality. So we might be looking to get input on the methods from reviewers. So the associate editor will strategically choose reviewers and invite them to give feedback. And the peer reviewers do a great job in returning papers inside 2 weeks in most occasions. And so the whole process, we aim to get a first decision if it's going to be rejection within a week, a first decision if it's not rejected in a month. This is our average. And we have this 50-day outlier where we try to make sure everything's done in 50 days. And there's only a couple of % of papers that don't get dealt with inside 50 days for that first decision. So then as an author, when you get this peer review content back, whether it's in a paper's accepted or not, you should be able to learn a lot and strengthen the paper. And I know every author, and I have been an author, has had papers strengthened by peer review, whether for that journal or another journal. So I'll stop there. Sebastiano.
Okay. That's that was quite an overview. Thank you. So going through the website and let's say the BJSM homepage, some element records, and then I think there was putting an accent on them was interesting. So it's not longer just a journal. BJSM, I'm just quoting, BJSM is a multimedia portal for authoritative original research, systematic reviews, consensus statements, etc. So it's no longer a journal, it's a portal. It's also something that involves podcast, as you mentioned, and a lot of other stuff. So this has been quite of a transformation from just being a journal, right?
Yeah. No, thanks, Sebastiano, for alluding to that. And that's been a fun part of the editor job. And all of us who work with the journal and the team in London, has been super supportive. So short version, I think many people will know BJSM from the podcasts and from the social media. And we are trying to engage actively with our community. We're trying to listen to our community. So these channels are actually very good for hearing from the community. Criticism is important as well, and we've heard a lot of criticism, through social media, and it has to be give and take. And that's part of the concept, the broad concept of peer review, peers discussing, and just accountability with the community. So I'm using that term when we hear comments on social media, not just the traditional journal peer review. So that was 2008 was an exciting time because Twitter was starting, Instagram didn't exist. I think there was a thing called MySpace that wasn't as good as Facebook and stuff like that. So, it's been fun and a lot of time for us, in this space. And I think every listener will be wondering if they're spending too much time on social media or not. Some, the ones who do. And we want to embrace that because clearly we can learn as clinicians and be better clinicians from all these different sources. So, I think we jumped onto Twitter fairly early on, 2010, and so now we have the 70,000 followers there, and that's one channel for a certain level of discussion, but there are certain things that aren't well discussed on Twitter, and they need to be on blogs and other platforms. So we try to be very positive on Twitter to support other journals and to share material across the field, as those who are on Twitter will know. So if there's a great paper in Journal of Orthopaedic and Sports Physical Therapy, JOSPT will say, here's a great paper. We try to focus on things that are free because it's a bit frustrating if someone says, here's a great paper, but it's behind paywall. We try to be supportive. So if and encourage and shine the light on who's done the work. So if there's a BJSM paper, we'll highlight the authors and say congratulations to these authors. So there's a discussion about how social media is used, obviously, and then we have the negative elements of it in the world, which we can't control. But we tend to use it as a positive, not tend to. We only use it as a positive channel. So if I need to get in a debate with someone, I'll do that offline. And there's been situations where I've emailed the person who usually I know, and we have a respectful relationship where we can disagree, and then we'll email and have the discussion. Then we might put 1 or 2 points on Twitter to a link, but I don't debate on Twitter, as you know. And then Instagram, today we have over 30,000 followers on Instagram, and Paul Blasey, a running physiotherapist who has led that, has done a great job with us. And it's it has a different different type of information. And as users know, folks watching YouTube know, these different channels have different benefits. And so our goal is to try to put the right sort of benefit into the right channel so that the people who like those channels can get value. The YouTube videos began with the physical examination videos, which have had over 7 million views and helped clinicians learn how to examine the knee and the shoulder and the hip and groin. And Dr. Mark Hutchinson, the Chicago orthopedic surgeon, has been core to those, but then we just added different files into the YouTube channel, as you know. And I'll close this bit and get more comments from you with podcasts, where the big thing is to thank our podcast guests, because we've had over 400 podcasts, and the guests give their time for that for free. And then we decided we would go with a sort of 20-minute segment on podcasts. They're clearly the longer podcasts, and Clinical Edge and the great British podcast series go longer and more detail, which is great. So someone like a top physio like Ann Cools can be on a 20-minute podcast. She can be on a 1-hour podcast. And there are so many great channels that many people know. But we've enjoyed trying to get the key messages from these 400 superstars to people on the podcast. And there will be people who aren't sure, like, what are they talking about? So you can download the BJSM app, and then that's a great way of listening to podcasts. We hear that from many people. They love the BJSM app, which is just BJSM. And then there's a really easy touch on the listen to the podcast, as many people do with their phone. So we were lucky to wrap this bit up in that with the channels were developing. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook all came on. So that's perfect for us. And then the phones came along, the iPhones and the apps. And so we just have these background technologies now that weren't there for the editors around 2000, 2005.
True. No, as you said, pros and cons in each mean, but definitely you and other journals, but definitely you did a good job. The podcast also. And also the fact, as you correctly highlighted and underlined, the fact that the correct contents for the proper content for each mean, because podcast, you are kind of focused and listen to what people are saying, and 20 minutes is a sort of a limit of attention. After 30 minutes, you start, no longer paying that attention as you would like to. So definitely a great job done, and definitely a different job compared to what an editor-in-chief would have done maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago, because just of the evolution of the technological world. So what a challenge. And again, on a website, there is something on a BJSM website, there is something that caught my attention yesterday. I don't know why I never noticed that, but you already mentioned it. You talked about the community. So it's not just for physios or it's for a broad audience. And also, there is a sentence in which you say, we define sports and exercise medicine broadly. What do you mean with that?
Okay. You reminded me of the member societies, which make up part of our community. It's an essential part of our community. So at the BJSM, we're, again, trying to get the message out to people and to listen to people. So we want to be accessible. And I think the old-fashioned journals were inaccessible, obviously, for a bunch of reasons. And so one way to make things more accessible is to have a whole member society. So the Italian sports physios, for example, pay a baseline fee. And so the individual physio then in Italy gets the BJSM content for free, in air quotes, because the member society has paid for it. And our biggest numerically physio groups are the British physios, for example. You know, the Swiss physios have been leaders, the American doctors, AMSSM. These different organisations pay a massive discounted fee for, to get the BJSM access for all their members, versus an individual member paying 100, 200 euro, whatever the individual cost is. So that way we've been able to grow the community and provide access, all the BJSM content to people. So that's part of the community. And then people who just join through social media, we see them as part of our community. So we're trying to be inclusive. So, there's this broad multidisciplinary community, which gets to the point about defining sport and exercise medicine broadly. And that's obviously sports scientists are hugely welcome in BJSM, and we try to learn from them. But I make the distinction between sports science for its own sake, which to improve sport performance. So I'd talk about video analysis of a game, game analysis, energy expenditure, the whole physiology and performance side of, say, football. And there are journals for that, like Journal of Sports Science. And if there's nothing to do with injury on that side, then that's not for BJSM. But when, say, training load, which has been a big issue, is related to injury, then we are interested. So we're into the sports performance and sports science, nutrition, mechanics, when it relates to injury. So the underlying thing is, will it help clinicians? Is it clinically relevant? So that's the broad definition. And that brings us to food as well. I can't avoid mentioning food. I'm very keen to mention food and a healthy nutrition and nutrition for performance for a couple of big reasons. One reason is that there's a massive financial incentive for people in the nutrition industry to make money for things that are unethical, arguably illegal in some cases, banned foods and drugs. And but I need to underscore this massive financial motivation that I can clearly say that I don't have on the food side, because I don't have any financial benefits from any food things that I advise. But the classic example will be a nutritionist who has his own or her own consulting business. They sell products, either directly or on the side, and then they pretend it's based in science when it's not necessarily done. I'm conscious of what I'm saying here, and I'm very comfortable because I know people who do this unethical thing, and it might be a minority, but it needs to be clear, because the naive viewer will go, oh, this person says I should eat more of this thing and it's going to make me a better athlete. And they don't look at the financial bit. So there's a massive financial conflict of interest in the food industry, and that needs to be alerted to. And BJSM does not have that. Now, once we talk about industry, like the food companies, they're entitled to advertise and invest and do what they need to do to promote their products. But the person watching this podcast needs to realise that their goal, those industries' goal, is to return shareholder profit, and that's their job. And so the food industry, again, invests in websites and organisations such as the American Dietitian Group and National Dietitian Groups, and they donate money to those groups, and there are rules about how they do that, and it's reported on websites, but the reader and the viewer needs to go, I need to be careful. And so I'll hook back now to BJSM, that we are obviously someone who needs to be verbal and visible in that space, because the beauty of us is that we don't have any commercial interests and we're not paid by the food companies. And so then we are in a position to make statements with clear conscience. So nutrition needs to be part of the British Journal of Sport and Exercise Medicine mandate. And we've been told to stay out of our lane, to go, that's not in your lane. But we've discussed it. We've had support at the top level at the BMJ. And clearly exercise and food are closely related. And so we'd be crazy to say we don't do food, especially when we're one of the few clean people in this industry, and I use the word clean very carefully, in the fact that we're not financially involved in that business.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I would say we discussed about this briefly before chatting today. I would say a broad question. Not sure where this will lead, but let's see. What do you say, out of your experience, from your standpoint and perspective, what are the challenges for the present and the future challenges, also considering what we are going through? I mean, this is a weird period and it's changing the practice potentially. So many impacts. I mean, just thinking about telehealth, but it's just an example, just to say this thing that you are going through clearly is having and will have an impact. Also in terms of research production. So I'm a researcher and I want to produce papers. Do I have to think in another way now because of what's going on and how this will impact our future lives?
Yeah, and I'll be concise here, and I know we should be coming towards a close, Sebastiano, and appreciate folks listening and watching. I won't pretend to have the answer for COVID, unfortunately, and I think the big point is obviously to be conscious of all the suffering that's gone on health-wise and the associated economic challenges that we're all going to have, and some of us are more isolated than others, so I'm not pretending to personally be in the same situation as some people who are just struggling to get food. And so my thoughts are with everyone as yours are in our whole community. I know many private practice clinicians are very much affected by the regular clinical model not being available and the telehealth not being funded properly in many organisations. So beginning by acknowledging the challenge for our community, the big challenge for our community. I think if we look broadly, I want to make the point that in research and quality of evidence, the standards are going up all the time, the way they do in sport and in everything. So that means that papers are a bit more sophisticated and the statistics can be more sophisticated and more challenging. So clinical practice isn't as simple as it was when I was going through, where I was told, if you do this shoulder exam test named after some famous American orthopedic surgeon, and I'll say that respectfully, then that means the patient has this diagnosis. And it's like, well, now we know that's not true. And speaking of Chad Cook, he's done a great job with his textbook on showing how to examine. So just a simple thing like physical exam is much more sophisticated now, with pre-test probabilities and post-test probabilities and likelihood ratios, which are all important, and the clinician needs to try to figure that out. And I think we'll get the clinicians, I think, will use apps. I think the technology will catch up to the science, and so there will be apps. And so a clinician, instead of trying to figure that out in their head, they might put some results into the app. Rod Whiteley's done that with hamstring rehab, where you can put in the strength and the range of motion and the tenderness, and it can give you the days likely for the patient to get back. So I think we have more data now and more good quality science knowledge, but we don't have the simple ways to get that into the clinic yet. So I see that that will improve. So that's both a challenge and a good potential solution. I think in clinical practice, very difficult. The challenge is that the breadth of knowledge that we have, trying to be an expert across sports, across parts of the body like the hip, the knee, ankle, shoulder. I think it's tough for clinicians to keep up, because we know that there's this massive volume of material going onto the internet every day and onto the journals. And I can't keep up, as a full-time academic with a fair time allocated to journal editing. I can't keep up with the literature. So it's like, what chances are there? But then, there are these platforms and that are being used to synthesize that. So I think there'll be a lot of benefit from groups who are synthesizing and doing things like they're curating and collating the material into chunks, and that's the purpose of the podcast. We're saying, look, you can get 20 years of experience from this clinician and they're going to give you the key points in 20 minutes. So I think the challenge is the volume of material. I think the solution will be these aggregator platforms and things, which hooks us back to what BJSM tried to do, is that we've been trying to help to make it tangible for the clinician. Yeah,
and I appreciate your answer. This is Clearly, we as Novavia, we are not either a scientific journal or any kind of scientific authority. What we're just trying to do, and also what's happening now with the Nova Talks, is this sort of sharing and 30, 40 minutes of knowledge, or even that might be very strictly related to the clinical topic, but sometimes, like it is happening with you today, in a broader sense, because again, it's useful and maybe can lead to some other thoughts. Maybe people are stimulated to get deeper on some part of knowledge that now they have the time to spend on because of the weird situation we are living through. So first of all, thank you very much. That was very appreciated. First time we got in contact, but you immediately accepted our invitation, so that was really appreciated. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, congratulations. And as you say, Nova Talks and Novavia, it's exactly what I was talking about in terms of synthesizing information, having a quality bar so that we can point to this on social media channels, and people who trust the brands, such as the journal brands and the individual brands of people who are respected in the field, leaders in the field, will be able to point community members to things like Nova Talks and Novavia. So congratulations to you for your hard work. As you know, Sebastiano, you've got to put a lot of hours into connecting, preparing, editing. And as an editor, so I'm talking about video editing and sound editing. So congratulations on what you're giving to your community, Sebastiano.
Thank you very much. And so long story short, guys, hope you appreciate that. That was another Nova Talk with a great and experienced Karim Kam today. And thank you, and see you around next time.